Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into something absolutely wild. We're taking a fascinating and, honestly, a deeply unsettling look at what actually happens when the ultimate authority in a society, the absolute monarch, entirely loses their grip on reality. Now, let's be clear right out of the gate. We are not talking about your run-of-the-mill, quirky historical eccentrics who just had weird hobbies or, strange preferences. No. We are examining rulers who were so completely out of their minds that their advisors, their families, and really their entire nations just had to figure out how to survive them. We're talking about leaders who had genuinely entirely lost the plot. Because think about this terrifying juxtaposition for a second. The expectation of a monarch is that they possess the highest formal power on earth, right? Making decisions for millions, leading armies, shaping the entire future. But the horrifying reality we're exploring today, it's a complete and total disconnection from the real world. I mean, how do empires even cope when the person steering the ship doesn't even know they're on a boat? Let's kick things off with our first case study. Section 1, the man-eating emperor. We're talking about Justin II of Rome. He inherited the Eastern Roman Empire in 565 AD from his uncle, Justinian the Great. And man, those were some massive shoes to fill. Initially, Justin was sharp, he was ambitious, but the sheer stress of running an empire under constant attack literally broke his mind. You had Persians invading from the east, Lombards rampaging through Italy, and the treasury completely empty. Justin started hearing voices. He'd scream at people who weren't even there, and it escalated to the point where his own palace guards were terrified of him because he would physically try to bite and literally eat his own servants. So what do you do with a violent, biting emperor? Well, the palace staff had to get creative, and the result is just darkly sad. They figured out that to keep him contained, they had to wheel him around the palace on a little cart. And the only thing that seemed to calm his violent fits was playing organ music. But when organ music wasn't available, attendants would literally run alongside his cart, making funny faces through the windows just to distract him. But despite all that madness, there was this tragic self-awareness at times. Empress Sophia finally convinced him to hand over actual power to a co-emperor, a general named Tiberius, to run the show. And in this rare, heartbreaking moment of total lucidity, Justin handed over the reins and spoke these exact words: "May God be with you, I myself am nothing now." He spent the last 5 years of his life as a screaming man being wheeled around the palace. Moving right along to case number 2, the Glass King. This is King Charles VI of France. Charles was just 23 when his mind totally snapped. He was out for a ride through a forest when a barefoot man suddenly grabbed his horse's bridle, shouting all this stuff about betrayal. Hours later, a dropped lance clanged against a helmet, and that sudden noise, it triggered a deadly frenzy. Charles drew his sword and killed 4 of his own knights, and that sparked a 30-year descent into severe mental illness. His primary and most terrifying delusion was that his body was constructed entirely out of glass, and I don't mean metaphorically. He genuinely believed that if anyone even touched him, he would shatter into pieces. He had iron rods sewn into his clothing for protection, and he'd just stand perfectly still for hours. He even entirely forgot his own identity, failing to recognize his own coat of arms, his wife, his kids, just wandering the halls screaming that he was not the king. And this single broken mind triggered a massive historical domino effect. It's like a tragic equation. The king goes mad, which creates this huge power vacuum in France. So his relatives, specifically his brother and cousin, wage a bloody civil war for control, all while the king is just standing frozen in his palace. Well, this internal chaos creates the absolute perfect opening for Henry V of England to invade and win the legendary Battle of Agincourt in 1415. A fragile mind fundamentally altered the entire course of the Hundred Years' War. All right, let's jump over to 1505 China for case number 3, the Pretend Emperor. Meet Emperor Zhengde of the Ming Dynasty. He was given absolute power over the largest empire on earth at just 13 years old, and honestly, he thought ruling was kind of boring. So he invented this elaborate fake military persona for himself named General Zhu. He would actually write official imperial requests to himself under this fake general name, literally switch hats, and then approve his own requests as emperor. He was forcing his ministers to process entirely fake paperwork through a real, massive government bureaucracy. But he didn't stop there. He built the Leopard Quarter inside the palace grounds, which was essentially a completely fake mini-town.
He forced his eunuchs to pretend to be shopkeepers so he could go around haggling with them using fake money. He kept this wild exotic zoo and, terrifyingly for his advisors, even tried to wrestle a live tiger, which, surprise, surprise, badly injured him. Just picture this, a grown man, literally the most powerful man on earth, playing shopkeeper while his top officials just had to stand around, nod, and smile.
Now, let's head to 1640 for case number 4, the fur-obsessed Sultan. To really understand Sultan Ibrahim's descent into madness, we have to look at something called the kafes. It was essentially a luxurious prison. You see, instead of executing rival heirs, the Ottomans started locking them in this gilded cage for life. Ibrahim spent 22 years in complete state-sanctioned isolation here. He literally sat in his cage watching as his brothers were strangled one by one. So when it was finally time for him to take the throne, he flat out refused to leave. He was convinced it was an elaborate trick to kill him. His mother literally had to drag his brother's dead body to the door just to prove it was safe to come out. As you might imagine, those 22 years of total isolation completely shattered his mental health. Once he actually had power, his behavior became incredibly bizarre. He developed this severe, almost manic obsession with fur, demanding that the entire palace, the walls, the floors, the ceilings, be draped in it. And he'd just casually throw the empire's wealth away, literally. He'd toss gold coins into fish ponds just to watch them sink, and pour massive amounts of ridiculously expensive perfume into fountains. He completely ignored his advisors, who were desperately warning him that the treasury was running dry. But then, things took a horrifically dark turn. 280 over a single unverified rumor that one of his concubines might have been unfaithful. Ibrahim had 280 women bound in weighted sacks and drowned in the Bosphorus Strait. Only one survived. This unimaginable cruelty ultimately proved to be the breaking point for the empire. His own mother actually had to authorize a coup just to throw him back into his cage. Finally, we arrive at case number 5, the Slapping King. In 1766 Denmark, you have 17-year-old King Christian VII. Now, initially, he seemed intelligent, even charming, but within just 6 months, his court was living in absolute terror. He would bang his head against walls until he bled. He developed this wild compulsion to just slap people right in the face mid-conversation for absolutely no reason. Dignitaries, servants, his own top advisors, nobody was safe. He'd go on these nightly rampages just smashing windows all over Copenhagen. He was plagued by delusions of invisible forces controlling him, and perhaps most alarmingly, he'd fall into these states of complete catatonia. He'd sit totally motionless for days at a time before suddenly snapping out of it and, you guessed it, starting to slap people again. So into this complete vacuum of leadership steps Johann Friedrich Struensee. He was a German physician brought in to treat the king. Well, Struensee realizes pretty quickly that the king is totally incapacitated and is never going to actually rule. So he does something incredibly audacious. He befriends Christian, gained his trust, and then quietly just takes over the entire Danish government himself. For 16 months, Struensee basically ruled Denmark, issuing over 1,000 royal decrees in the king's name, while Christian just wandered around the palace in a daze. 0. Despite living to the age of 59 and officially holding the title of king for 42 years, Christian VII was actually in charge for exactly 0 of those years. The system simply kept him propped up as a deteriorating figurehead while a whole series of regents practically ruled the country right around him. So let's step back for a minute. Let's look at the broader pattern we've just uncovered across these 5 vastly different empires and centuries. When we look at all of this side by side, a truly terrifying pattern emerges. Justin's biting fits left him wheeled in a cart while generals ran the show. Charles's glass delusion invited a disastrous foreign invasion. Zhengde's elaborate playtime totally bogged down an empire's bureaucracy with fake paperwork. Abraham's deep trauma resulted in mass murder. And Kristen's catatonia allowed a random doctor to basically steal a whole country. The absolute crucial takeaway here is that absolute monarchy operates with a massive, dangerous, systemic bug. When every ounce of power is concentrated in just one mind, and that mind breaks, the ripple effects on history are completely unchecked, profound, and far too often devastating. You know, it is incredibly easy to romanticize the crowns, the castles, and the idea of total authority. It sounds great in movies, but when you remove all the checks and balances, the survival of an entire nation relies solely on the fragile sanity of a single human being.